Beneath the relentless sun of Charleston County in 1849, the Wexler plantation stood as a testament to Southern wealth, a grand, white-pillared edifice, majestic on the outside, but rotting at its core. The thick, humid air, heavy with the perfume of blooming magnolias, held a far more profound weight, a pervasive silence. It wasn't the silence of peace, but of profound suppression, of names forbidden from being spoken, of truths buried in soil the color of dried blood. Ada was a child of that silence. Her mother, Miriam, a woman with a towering frame and sharp, knowing eyes, had been brought from the Angolan coast, her native languages beaten out of her. By the time Ada was old enough to carry a tray of tea or iron the master's linens, her mother's once fiery spirit had been extinguished, replaced by a meek "yes, sir" or "no, ma'am," and an impenetrable silence in between. Miriam had worked in the master's house, and so Ada would too. But while her mother had once been a flame, Ada became a shadow. She learned to survive not by defiance, but by dissolving herself. To the Wexlers, she was merely a pair of steady hands and downcast eyes, a girl who could mend a hem without a mistake, brew an elderberry tonic to break a fever, or disappear from a room before anyone even acknowledged she was there. At 15, she was assigned to the main house to assist in the care of young Master Elijah. His pale skin and golden hair were a source of unending praise from guests and neighbors, who spoke of him as the future, the heir who would one day inherit the family's legacy of cotton, commerce, and cruelty. Ada watched him with the detached awareness of someone who knew her place, yet a deeper understanding, passed down from her mother in hushed whispers before dawn, allowed her to see beyond the surface. She saw the way the mistress looked at Elijah, not with maternal pride, but with a haunted, hollow sadness. She noticed the glacial stiffness between the master and his wife during their evening meals, the cold glances exchanged over roasted quail and bourbon. Then came the night the world shifted. Thunder cracked violently over the plantation house, and the rain hammered against the tin roof like the frantic rattle of distant chains. Ada, walking the hallway with a bowl of medicinal tea, froze as she heard voices from behind the study door. The mistress was crying, not with the delicate sobs of a Southern lady, but with a wounded guttural cry that seemed to tear from her very soul. The master's voice, sharp and laced with cruelty, rose to meet it. "You think I wanted her? You think I planned for this? She's gone. I sold her. It's over." Ada didn't dare breathe. The name wasn't spoken, but it didn't need to be. She knew. Later that night, as she returned to the servant quarters, her fingers trembled as she unpinned her apron. Miriam had been taken away when Ada was only 8, without a warning or a final goodbye. Sold, they had said, as if it were simply the way of things. But now Ada understood the truth. Miriam hadn't just been sold. She had been erased, not just from the house, but from the lineage itself. Because Elijah, the golden boy, the shining hope of the Wexler name, was Miriam's son. From that moment on, Ada stopped being just a servant. She became a witness, a silent keeper of a memory so profound it could undo everything. She didn't cry. She didn't confront. She simply listened more carefully, watched more closely. She began tracing the bloodlines that others pretended did not cross, memorizing dates, words, and gestures. She learned to read the rhythm of guilt and the cadence of lies. Elijah grew into a man, but he never once saw Ada as anything more than a servant. He'd ask for his boots, his breakfast, his books. He didn't see the shape of his own mother in the stubborn set of Ada's jaw or the unwavering darkness of her eyes. He had forgotten what was stolen from him, but Ada had not. The Wexler plantation presented itself as a place of order and civility, but beneath its manicured gardens and echoing halls, something was already beginning to rot. Ada moved within it like a ghost, unacknowledged, unnoticed, and yet never forgetting. She was no longer just a girl born into silence. She was becoming its keeper, and one day, its undoer. The year Elijah turned 21, the entire plantation celebrated. A grand banquet was held under the lantern-lit oaks, with guests from as far as Savannah gathering to toast the young heir of Wexler. They spoke of lineage, of legacy, of the proud Southern blood that flowed through Elijah's veins. Ada served them all with a steady hand, the wine in her tray trembling only when a sudden gust of wind swept through the trees. No one looked her in the eye. The house had grown quieter in recent years. The mistress had retreated to her chambers, clutching a Bible she no longer seemed to open. Her hair had turned white far faster than time should have allowed, and her voice had withered to a coarse whisper. The master, heavier and slower, had become prone to long, bitter silences. Slaves were fewer now. Some sold, some dead. Others vanished into the night with nothing but the wind at their backs. But Ada remained. She moved through the corridors like memory itself, gathering fragments of the past. It was during one of her routine cleanings of the study that Ada found the letter. It had either slipped beneath a floorboard or been hidden there long ago, folded 3 times and yellowed with age, sealed with a familiar wax, bearing the Wexler crest. She read it only once. That was enough. It was from the mistress, addressed to a sister in New Orleans, not a confession, but a raw, desperate cry veiled in gentility. She spoke of betrayal, of waking in the night to find her husband missing, of hearing voices through the attic floorboards. She named no names, but the full weight of the truth bled through every line. And in the final damning paragraph, she wrote of a child, a boy born with his father's eyes and his mother's curse. She was a child the mistress could never truly claim as her own, a boy she had been forced to raise under the same roof as the woman who had replaced his own mother. Ada carefully folded the letter and slid it back beneath the floorboard. She didn't weep. There was no true discovery in those lines, only a bone-deep confirmation of what she already knew. The rage-fueled confession she'd overheard years ago was now preserved in ink, a testament to a secret the mistress had known all along. In the weeks that followed, Ada began to visit the small, forgotten graveyard behind the orchard. It was a humble place, with no grand stones or engraved family markers, just crooked wooden crosses and quiet, nameless mounds of earth. She tended to the weeds, left a handful of wildflowers, and whispered to the ground, not prayers, but solemn promises. Meanwhile, Elijah, utterly oblivious to the tremors beneath his feet, was preparing for his future. He had become engaged to a young woman from Tennessee, the daughter of a plantation owner twice as wealthy and half as cruel. She was set to arrive within the month, and the house stirred with restless activity. New linens were aired out, and the silver was polished until it gleamed. Ada was assigned as the bride-to-be's personal attendant, a role the mistress accepted with a strange, hollow nod. "You're quiet," the mistress observed one evening as Ada brushed her hair. "I listen, ma'am," Ada replied. It was true. She listened to the midnight creak of the staircase, to the hushed whispers behind locked doors, to the strained, shallow breaths of a woman who had once been a pillar of the house, now terrified of her own reflection. The mistress had grown brittle, as if the truth she had swallowed decades ago had finally begun to consume her from within. One night, as distant thunder rumbled and the lamps flickered low, the mistress summoned Ada with trembling hands. "Do you know who you are?" she asked, her voice a mere whisper. Ada met her gaze, her expression unreadable. "No, ma'am," she said. The mistress nodded slowly, as if that was the answer she had expected, or perhaps feared. The walls of that house remembered what its occupants tried so desperately to forget, the lies etched into the family Bible, the child who was both heir and illegitimate, the mother who was sold to preserve a name, and the daughter who was left behind, quiet, observant, and waiting. The engagement was publicly announced a week later, with the wedding to take place in the spring. Elijah strode across the grounds with a swelling pride, speaking of legacy, of future sons, of new beginnings. But Ada knew the past was not buried. It was listening, and it was almost ready to speak. Spring arrived with a deceptive warmth, soft winds carrying the sweet scent of blooming magnolias and the faint, acrid tang of freshly tilled cotton fields. The Wexler plantation was a hive of restless anticipation. Invitations were sent, dresses measured and sewn, and silver polished to a mirror shine. It was a season of pomp and promise, a season where the dark past could be neatly tucked away behind a polished veneer of wealth and civility. Yet within the house a different rhythm pulsed, slow, deliberate, and almost imperceptible. Ada moved through it all like a quiet, integral note in a grand symphony. She had been assigned to the bride-to-be, a young woman from Tennessee who arrived one afternoon, delicate and eager to please. The girls' bright laughter echoed through the hallways, oblivious to the secrets they concealed. Ada served her tea, adjusted her hems, and brushed her hair, listening all the while. Every word, every careless confession was carefully stored in the silent corners of Ada's mind, a growing archive of secrets. The girl spoke of future children, of a life tied to a man she had barely met, of her excitement for status and society. Elijah, a man of carefully measured pride, moved through his days with the easy confidence of someone utterly convinced of his own innocence. He spoke to Ada only when necessary, issuing instructions with an unthinking, dismissive authority. He had no idea he was giving orders to a ghost of his own past. He never saw the resemblance, the echo of his own bloodline in her posture, her eyes, the faint curve of a smile inherited from Miriam. He never once imagined that she knew, that she had always known. Weeks turned into a quiet, deliberate march. Ada found herself wandering the study late at night, a ghost tending to dust and candle wax, but truly seeking patterns in the whispers of the past. It was there that she found the final piece of the puzzle she needed, the mistress's diary, hidden behind a false panel in the bookcase. Ada read each page with methodical care. The entries began as innocent chronicles of daily life and social calls, but gradually the words bled into confession of the child born of Miriam, of the secrecy, the fear, and the relentless anxiety of a woman trapped by appearances. Every page confirmed what Ada had long suspected. The very foundations of the Wexler legacy were built on theft and violence, all buried beneath a thin layer of civility. The diary was a lesson in patience and timing. Ada saw the cracks in the household, the mistress's brittle compliance, the master's temper simmering under his fragile pride, and Elijah's deep-seated ignorance of his own origin. She understood that vengeance required precision, not rage, and that a world could be toppled far more effectively with a single, sharp piece of knowledge than with 1,000 angry fists. At night, she practiced restraint, maintaining her role perfectly, smiling softly, serving quietly, and speaking only when spoken to. She became a ghost in plain sight, observing the engagements, the letters, the whispered arrangements for the wedding. Every event was catalogued in her mind, the route the bride would take, the seating order, the arrival of distant relatives who prided themselves on their purity of blood. All noted, all remembered. All the while, Ada nurtured her purpose, quiet as the shadows beneath the rose bushes in the garden. She learned which voices could be trusted, which could be manipulated, and which would crumble under a carefully placed revelation. She traced the patterns of greed, vanity, and fear in the family that had once sought to erase her mother, and she waited. The mansion, resplendent in its spring finery, hummed with life and blissful oblivion. No one suspected the storm building in the quiet silence of the kitchen, the study, and the servant quarters. Ada moved with a deliberate care, unseen yet central, an instrument tuned to strike with inevitability. The wedding was approaching, and with it, the perfect opportunity. She had memorized every schedule, every routine, every small moment where a secret could pierce the mask of civility. And when the time came, Ada would reveal what had been buried for so long, not in a storm of fury, but with the cold, precise certainty of knowledge, letting the truth speak for itself. The roses bloomed at the edge of the orchard, their fragrance sweet and misleading, masking the bitterness growing quietly beneath them. And Ada, patient and resolute, walked among them, a shadow carrying the weight of unspoken history, preparing for the day when the house would finally hear the voices it had tried so long to silence. The day of the wedding arrived beneath a sky bruised with clouds, the sun struggling to pierce the hazy air. Guests from distant plantations, men in starched collars and women in lace and silk, arrived in rattling carriages, bringing with them expectations of elegance, propriety, and the reinforcement of hierarchies that had been long unchallenged. The house hummed with preparations. Silver gleamed in the candlelight, crystal glasses sparkled, and the scent of roses mingled with fresh pine from the newly polished floors. Yet, beneath all this surface perfection, a subtle tension threaded through the air, like a quiet tremor before an earthquake. Ada moved through it all with the ease of a shadow. Every greeting she offered, every hem she adjusted, every quiet whisper she passed along to the bride was carefully measured. She carried herself with a calm that belied the storm she had nurtured over years of silence and observation. She had memorized the routines of the family, the timing of their comings and goings, the order in which servants and guests would pass through each room. Every detail had been catalogued, every gesture understood, so that when the moment arrived, nothing would be left to chance. The ceremony began with music from a quartet hidden behind the gallery doors. Elijah stood at the altar, handsome and completely oblivious, the proud heir to a legacy built on secrecy and theft. The bride, radiant in white, moved down the aisle with a delicate smile, her eyes bright with anticipation. Ada followed silently behind her, her hands carrying nothing but the profound composure that had become her armor. She spoke only when necessary, her voice a soft hum that concealed the knowledge she carried within. As the minister began to speak, a hush fell over the room. Guests leaned forward, captivated by the solemnity of the ceremony and oblivious to the undercurrents that pulsed beneath the surface. Ada had chosen her moment, and she had chosen it with meticulous care. The letter, the diary, and every whispered recollection had been quietly passed to a figure long thought to be absent, a woman who had been freed from the Wexler household years ago, now returned. Stepping forward, her voice trembling with a controlled force, the woman began to read aloud the truths that had been hidden for decades. Names were spoken, dates were revealed, and the lineage of Elijah, the golden son who had been raised in privilege while his mother was sold into obscurity, was laid bare for all to hear. The grand room seemed to shrink under the weight of the revelation. Faces paled, eyes widened in disbelief, and a few guests turned away to hide their shame. Elijah's proud posture sagged as understanding slowly seeped in, the crushing weight of the truth revealing that his inheritance, his status, his very identity, had been built on a foundation of lies. The bride stood frozen, the sheen of her excitement curdling into horror as guests murmured and shifted uncomfortably. The master and mistress of the house stood like petrified statues, the culmination of decades of deceit now exposed in a single gut-wrenching instant. Ada did not speak. She didn't need to. Her presence, steady and silent, was more potent than any declaration. The truth she had preserved, nurtured and timed with deliberate care, now moved through the room with the precision of a blade. Social ties crumbled, alliances fractured, and the carefully maintained facade of civility disintegrated before her eyes. The wedding, a symbol of continuation and prosperity, had become a testament to exposure, to the fragility of lies, and to the inevitable power of truth when carried patiently by those who had been silenced. Ada remained in her place, calm and unshaken, watching as the house that had tried to erase her mother reeled in disgrace. In that silence she felt the first quiet echo of justice. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, but it was absolute, and it belonged entirely to her. The plantation fell into a silence that felt almost sacred after the chaos of the wedding. Guests had departed, leaving behind only whispers of scandal and the faint smell of roses trampled in haste. The Wexler family remained, their pride broken and their authority quietly diminished. Ada moved among them as always, unnoticed and unremarkable, yet fully aware of the currents she had set in motion. She did not gloat, nor did she claim victory. She simply existed, a still point in a world unmade by truths long denied. Days passed, and the atmosphere in the mansion grew tense and brittle. The master, once imperious, now muttered under his breath, his hands trembling as he held letters from relatives who had condemned the family in polite but unmistakable terms. The mistress retreated to her chambers, staring into corners where ghosts might reside, haunted by the choices she had made, and the knowledge that secrecy could no longer protect her. Elijah wandered the halls like a man lost in a fog, grappling with the revelation that the life he had considered natural and untouchable was built on violence and deception. His eyes, once sharp and confident, now flickered with doubt and self-reproach. Ada observed it all. She maintained her tasks with a quiet precision, tending to the household's needs while holding the weight of memory and justice close to her chest. She spoke when necessary, her voice soft, but carrying an unshakable authority that few dared to challenge. In the servant quarters, she was no longer just a companion or caretaker. She was a figure of quiet power. Other slaves, free and enslaved alike, recognized in her presence a knowledge that the house itself seemed to fear. Her actions were measured, deliberate, but always guided by the long arc of justice she had cultivated over years of observation and patience. Yet Ada did not seek recognition. She didn't need to. The revelation at the wedding had done more than just embarrass the Wexlers. It had shifted the balance of power subtly, irrevocably. Ada understood that influence often worked in silence. She was the keeper of secrets, the guardian of truths too dangerous to be spoken aloud in polite company. Those who had attempted to erase her and her mother's existence had learned that a legacy was not only written in wealth and title, but in the quiet persistence of memory. She returned often to the graves behind the orchard, tending the soil and whispering in tones that were neither prayer nor accusation. She spoke to her mother, to the child she had been, to the echoes of injustice that lingered in the air. These visits were not about mourning. They were about acknowledgement, about asserting the presence of those the world had tried to erase. Each act of care was a deliberate reclamation of dignity stolen by the Wexlers and their ilk. In the months that followed, news of the family's scandal traveled through the surrounding counties. The Wexlers became a cautionary tale, their name spoken with polite curiosity or quiet contempt. Ada remained at the heart of the house, her influence invisible yet undeniable. She had turned the very mechanisms of oppression against their architects with a breathtaking precision and care. And in that silence she carried the quiet, unassailable truth. That power could be wielded without violence, that justice could be achieved without spectacle, and that those who had lived by erasure and deceit could be undone by a single, unwavering witness. Ada, the shadow that had always moved unseen, had become the voice that could no longer be ignored. She was no longer simply a servant, a daughter, or a witness. She was the keeper of secrets, the arbiter of consequences, and the quiet inheritor of a history that refused to forget.